Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, thank you for me being here. I want to thank especially Israeli Alpa for their invitation, Maidan. My name is Otjan de Bruijn. I'm the Vice President of the European Cockpit Association and also captain on the Boeing 777 and the 787 flying for KLM, very small country, northern part of Europe. I've been asked to present to you something about our work we do in Brussels for the ECA, explain to you some of the current status on membership for drone pilots with member associations, unions, and also the current situation of the drone regulation done by mainly EASA in Europe. So what is the European Cockpit Association? In the 1980s of the previous century, after the regulation of the US aviation market, the same forces started to work in Europe to do the same and forming a single European aviation market. This eventually happened in 1992, and this resulted in what is named nowadays Regulation 1008-2008. This regulation is the foundation of the common rules for the operation of air services in the European market. But it also resulted in a loss of influence of the unions and the pilot organizations in Europe on a national level, because normally they could approach their national institutions and do their lobbying efforts, but it all moved towards rulemaking in Brussels. So for that reason, in 1991, the ECA was founded in Brussels to be at the heart of the European regulation and to do the collective lobbying and representation at European level. At this moment, the ECA has 36 member associations, and we have almost 40,000 European professional pilots as members. So what does the ECA stand for? What do we do? We are like a spider in the European political web. We have influence through committees, certain rulemaking groups and other stakeholder processes in, for instance, ECAC, which is the European Civil Aviation Conference, and they're dealing mainly with security. Further, we have the CAN, which is the European Committee for Standardization, CESAR, which deals with single European sky, of course the European Commission, and EASA, the Aviation Safety Agency, who also is responsible for the drone regulation. I would like to highlight some of the main topics we are working on in ECA for the past year. One of the main priorities is the fight against atypical employment. What is atypical employment? It is when pilots have, for instance, zero-hour contracts, pay-to-fly contracts, or contracts through intermediaries. These atypical forms of aircrew employment had been the exception a decade ago, and they have now spread rapidly and widely within all segments of the industry, from low-cost to legacy carriers. Pilot supply, also a very interesting topic. There is no issue at this stage with the availability of licensed pilots in most European countries. There is, however, a growing issue with the employer's perceived quality of pilots graduating from the flight schools. So for the future, attracting, properly selecting and training the candidates are the core challenges when discussing the pilot supply. So any alleged pilot shortage claims must not be used to weaken European regulation on, for instance, pilot training, flight time limitations for instructors or examiners, or other relevant safety legislation. So crew interoperability is also a very new challenge for us. Under pressure of some airlines, EASA has adopted a rulemaking process enabling crew interoperability, which means that a flight crew member can fly for several airlines at the same time, for several AOCs, without undergoing an operator conversion course. It is a form of employee sharing, which is illegal in some countries in the EU. But transnational interoperability could easily contribute to social dumping through the facilitation of letterbox companies, to regulatory form shopping, and the absence of clarity on applicable law to aircrew is a challenge in itself. It can also be abused to downgrade crew's working conditions. Drone regulation is another topic which the ECA is involved in, and that is through several rulemaking tasks within EASA. So speaking of drones, the number of drone pilots in all European countries is growing rapidly. We welcome these drone pilots to become our members, to join our professional pilot community, as this profession might well outnumber the total of classical pilots in the near future. When looking at membership of these drone pilots, there are some challenges with, and developments which are interesting. ECA has encouraged our member associations to realize membership for drone pilots since 2017, and some MAs have agreed to accept them among their membership. Israel is one of them, otherwise the unions from England, Spain, Norway and Austria are the other ones. And the other members are still evaluating the options. There are some challenges, however, because some members want only professional pilots and not recreational pilots. Some offer a full membership for drone pilots and others only associate membership. What is further the qualification required? Is it like now, professional pilots, a full commercial pilot license or ATPL? Or do we also accept as members people who have done only an RPAS course? So RPAS is still an additional part of various professions, and a proper RPAS employed labor segment is still not developed, which complicates the issue of drone pilot membership. I try to avoid that you were showing up for me. The recent drone incidents at airports like Gatwick, Heathrow, Dublin and Stockholm show the necessity for drone regulation. What is important is aiming at incorporating the risk of drones in the airport risk management scheme and share and gather the results among organizations who have worked in the domain of drone collision with aircraft. This is how the current regulation in Europe looks like. There is no difference anymore between commercial and recreational operations. The EU framework proposes a division of drones into 3 subcategories, which is the open, specific and the certified category. These categories are based on the risk and type of operations performed by the operator or the pilot. EASA is currently in the lead of this regulation, and they are developing safety promotion material and developing national registration systems for their interoperability. So for carriage of people and dangerous goods, this can only be done in a certified category. So licenses and an AOC are needed, like in manned aviation. But imagine that packages of up to 25 kilograms can be delivered with only a little bit of pilot competence and an age just over 16. There's a large risk in this. So if outside the open category limitation, the specific category requirements are valid, whereby an operator is responsible for the risk assessment and his operator is recognized by the authorities, and there should be oversight, of course. The problem is in the open category, which is green. There's where the problem is. Because all commercial operations should be within the specific category. Because when money is involved, doing business, meaning carrying out operations for people, there should be a minimum quality control which is applicable for all operators and pilots. There is commercial pressure, which could be an incentive for operators for cutting the corners if there are no extra rules. In the light of the incidents at Gatwick recently, it would be more sensible to go further, to make legally binding the restrictions on where drones may fly and how high. The difficulty remains that all laws and regulations must be enforced, and at the moment they seem as little observed as speed limits are. So to conclude, in the absence of reliable technological ways to bring down rogue drones or even apparently to track down their controllers, the risk of a drone colliding with an airliner is just too high. And this needs urgent actions by the European regulators to make the sky safer. Thank you all for your attention.